I knew the moment something was off. Zachary Cole's smile was too sweet, like artificial sweetener poured over a crime scene. He leaned against the marble counter near the high-end espresso machine, tapping his glossy designer watch against his stainless steel tumbler like he was timing the descent of a guillotine. I had been grabbing my morning coffee from the executive wing for 12 years. Nobody cared, nobody noticed until now. The second I poured my usual 2 pumps of vanilla into my ceramic compliance director mug, he looked at me like I had just ruined his organic green tea. "You know that is a restricted zone, right?" he said, his voice low and syrupy, dripping with artificial concern. He was the CEO's newly appointed nephew, armed with an online business degree and an ego that could block out the sun. I blinked, halfway to the conference room, thinking he was joking. The restricted sign taped to the glass door was barely legible, curled at the edges, probably leftover from some security audit 3 years ago. I shrugged, raising my mug in a brief salute. "I did not realize I needed a security clearance for my coffee," I replied. "That was at 9 in the morning. At 2 in the afternoon, Human Resources called me in with the warmth of a cold basement. 3 managers sat there like a firing squad, and none of them would make eye contact. Lydia Thorne, the head of Human Resources, read from a folder as if it were absolute law. "Due to a willful breach of our restricted consumption protocol, your employment is terminated, effective immediately." I stared, my pulse remaining steady. My voice was calm. "May I have a printout of the termination clause?" I asked. Lydia looked annoyed, as if I were delaying her lunch break, but she handed it over. The words did not sting. What stung was the silence in the room, the realization that this had been orchestrated, not just by Zachary, but by someone higher up. I was 58 years old, only 60 days away from my pension vesting. My name was on more internal compliance protocols than the chief information officers. I was the structural backbone that kept this bloated company from being fined into ruin. But none of that mattered to them now, not when there was a new favorite on the executive floor. I spent my days reminding the company that minor details like chain of custody and record retention mattered. It turned out the real compliance breach was having the audacity to age out of Zachary's social media filter. Before I stood to leave, I looked Lydia dead in the eye and said, "You might want to review page 6 of the termination checklist, section C, line 3. She blinked, confused, and asked why. I smiled. "It just seems like today is a good day for accuracy." They escorted me out like I was dangerous. My coworkers, most of them good people, did not know what to say. Some looked away. One tried to mouth an apology, but turned back to his keyboard before he could finish. I walked out with my tote bag, my compliance mug, and a mind buzzing with a simple realization. I was not angry. I was going to give them exactly what they had earned. It was not dramatic revenge, just a single sequence entered silently on my phone in the elevator. The same security sequence I had written 4 years ago as a contingency protocol for compliance continuity. They had simply given Zachary the keys without understanding the lock. I drove to a local bakery, bought a cherry pastry, and watched the corporate tower fade in my rearview mirror. My phone buzzed, confirming the activation of the application. My face remained calm. This was just the beginning. The security guard walking me out, Brandon, looked embarrassed. He said nothing as we passed the break room, where someone had left a stale donut next to my old Employee of the Year plaque. I looked at it, remembering when the chief executive officer actually knew my name. Back then, the company cared about substance over appearance before ring lights and mindfulness sessions took over. "Just down this way," Brandon mumbled, pointing toward the heavy glass doors. I nodded, keeping my expression blank. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The application was hidden deep. Compliance Shell version 3.4.1. It looked like a simple calculator, entirely harmless. But it was not just an auditing tool. I had built it over long weekends, layering in fail-safes and encrypting its heartbeat to sync with our main servers. I entered my 8-digit code. No flourish, just confirmation. Compliance Bridge Protocol initiated. I felt a strange sense of peace as I slid the phone away. "You okay?" Brandon asked as we stepped into the lobby. "I have had worse mornings," I replied. At the reception desk, Stella Croft looked up with wide eyes. I handed her my identification badge. She hesitated, asking if I was sure. "Effective immediately," I said. Her face fell. She had not been told. No one had. This was done quietly. Zachary probably thought it made him look decisive, and the CEO believed removing me simplified things. But simplicity does not apply to systems built for legal compliance. You cannot pull out the foundation and expect the building to stand. I walked out into the cold wind, my car keys in hand. By the time I reached my vehicle, the first notification arrived on my personal email. The bridge was active, and the verification timer had started. They would not notice it today, but the system had already begun retracting access to unverified documents. The digital dominoes were falling. By 8:17 the next morning, the first signs of the system failure surfaced. The tech support team flagged it as a minor sync interruption, which was corporate speak for having no idea what was happening. Servers were sluggish and cloud backups were timing out. The AllJohn compliance logs, which compiled daily reports for our federal clients, started returning blank fields. Access logs were redacted. By 9 in the morning, the panic began to spread. A critical escalation ticket hit the infrastructure channel with one word in capital letters: unverified. That single word meant everything in our system, from vendor invoices to federal compliance certifications, was no longer traceable. In legal terms, the data had just been rendered completely inadmissible. The system had moved into restricted access mode, a contingency buried so deep in the protocol documentation that even the audit team did not know it existed. I sat in my living room, eating my breakfast, watching the alerts unfold through a mirrored system I had set up. I could have stopped the lockdown, but that would defeat the purpose. What was the point of all those years of redundancy planning if not to watch the failure of those who thought they could replace the person holding it all together? I had never hidden what I built. They just never cared to learn it. At 9:31, my phone vibrated with a news alert that our main e-invoicing portal was down. A vendor had posted online that they could not log in, receiving an unverified error. The post had only one like, and it was mine. In the corner office, Zachary was probably oblivious, planning his next team meeting. Meanwhile, Lydia was likely refreshing her dashboard, pretending it was a temporary internet issue. The best part was that the system did not crash. It simply paused like a butler refusing to serve someone who had never learned his name. By 10:07, the first major blow landed. The automatic sync with the Department of Transportation portal failed. A 5-year, $40 million contract was now at risk because the system required verified audit trails for federal data. Without my credentials validating the compliance anchor, the system refused to verify anything. The official internal alert was short: system entering restricted access mode. Reason: unverified overrides detected. Last authorized sequence: Clarence Vance. I had signed that override protocol myself 2 years ago during a routine compliance exercise, burying it under 4 levels of authentication. I knew someday someone would get arrogant and think my role was decorative. They were about to learn what a lean operation looked like when the compliance foundation was cut. My phone buzzed with a message from my former assistant. "Did you do something?" she wrote. "All hell is breaking loose here." I did not reply. Better to say nothing. Satisfaction settled in my chest, but it was not joy. It was clinical, like watching a garden wilt after the owner replaced the gardener with a plastic ornament. They wanted to replace me over a cup of coffee. Now, they could not even print a standard expense report, and this was only the morning. By 10:42, the executive floor was in complete chaos. People were pacing with phones pressed to their ears, and monitors were flashing red warnings. Zachary was walking around, telling everyone that everything was under control. "It is just Clarence being dramatic," he was saying. He had always been defensive, but he did not build spreadsheets. I built legal fortresses. The chief executive officer, Gerald Briggs, sat at the head of the boardroom table, a vein throbbing in his forehead. His phone was on speaker, and our outside legal counsel, Lawrence Weiss, was speaking. "We need full access to the audit logs," Lawrence demanded. "Send them to me in 10 minutes, or I start drafting non-compliance exposure language for the board." Gerald waved to the junior associate, Monica Webb. "Get it to him," he ordered. "I cannot," Monica stammered. "Everything is locked. The folder structures are there, but the files are encrypted." I tried logging into the compliance portal, but the system says the access chain is broken. Lawrence's voice came through the speaker, colder now. "What does that mean?" "It means," Monica said that Clarence's account was the validation anchor. Since he was terminated, the credentials are gone. Lawrence groaned. So you terminated the one person whose identity validated your federal infrastructure? Gerald rubbed his temples. He drank coffee in a restricted area, Lawrence. It was a clear violation. There was a long silence before Lawrence replied, "Good luck explaining that to the government when this goes public." Zachary tried to minimize the situation. "We just need to bypass the security," he said. "It is probably just a matter of resetting the server permissions." The problem was that our chief technology officer, Gordon, was on a silent meditation retreat in the desert with no phone service. The chief information officer, Miriam, was present but useless. She spent her time sifting through access logs like she was reading a foreign language. "Can we just restore from backup?" she asked. The IT specialist checked his monitor. "Backups paused yesterday afternoon," he said. "The moment Clarence was terminated. The system marked all data as pending review. It will not write new data until the compliance anchor is authenticated. I had built the system to doubt itself without my validation." Gerald slammed his hand on the table. "Reboot it." The specialist shook his head. "We cannot reboot a system that does not trust its own parameters." By 3:05 in the afternoon, Gerald Briggs was in full damage control mode. He was attempting to present a temporary system irregularity slide to the board, claiming they were merely migrating cloud environments. The board members stared at him with cold disbelief. "Are we certain this is not related to the departure of Clarence Vance?" asked Priscilla Hellman, a board director and former federal compliance officer. Her voice was sharp, and when she spoke, the room went quiet. Gerald coughed, saying that while Clarence's role was important, the current issues were technical. Priscilla raised her hand, silencing him. "I have read the alert," she said. "This is not a glitch. The system has revoked authentication because the compliance anchor is gone. Did anyone know we were using a single identity validation system?" Monica Webb looked terrified. "I was not aware of the depth of integration," she admitted. Priscilla arched an eyebrow. "Then what exactly did you know?" Gerald tried to intervene, claiming they were contacting vendors to restore access. "There is no transition plan," Priscilla stated. "You eliminated the department without understanding the architecture, and why was he fired for coffee?" Gerald mumbled about policy. "It was meant for the server rooms, not the executive hallway," Priscilla said. "Firing someone with his level of system clearance without a transition plan is complete negligence." Gerald had no answer. Across the city, I sat in a lawyer's office. She was reviewing my termination documents with a red pen. Her name was Fiona Mercer, a sharp corporate attorney who did not tolerate nonsense. "You were terminated without cause under a fabricated policy breach less than 60 days before your pension vested," she said. "That is retaliatory." I nodded, knowing they had rushed the termination to save money on my retirement package. She set her pen down and looked at me. "There is something much bigger here, Clarence. This company has a $40 million contract with the Department of Transportation. By terminating you, the CEO has caused a complete system freeze, putting that entire contract in jeopardy. In corporate law, this is a clear breach of fiduciary duty. Gerald Briggs has failed his duty of care to the shareholders and the corporation." I smiled. "I suspected as much," Fiona continued, pointing to another document. "Furthermore, I looked into this restricted consumption protocol that they claim you violated. According to company bylaws, any new policy must be approved by the safety committee and signed by the compliance director. You never signed this. In fact, look at the signature on the file they submitted to HR. It is a digital replica of your signature, but the metadata shows it was attached yesterday, hours after you were fired. It was backdated and forged. In the state of California, falsifying a corporate document is a violation of California Penal Code, Section 470, which is forgery. This makes the entire policy and your subsequent termination void ab initio. It means your firing is legally invalid from the very beginning." The room felt quiet as the weight of her words settled. I looked at my phone. A new alert showed that our logistics contract was officially paused by the government. "I want them to realize what happens when they throw away the foundation," I explained to my lawyer. "I want them to ask for my return, and when they do, I will decide the terms." We shook hands. No lawsuit was filed yet, just the promise of one. Power is not always about action. Sometimes it is about withholding the key. Let Gerald blame the servers and let Zachary pretend he has a solution. I was not burning the company down. I was just letting the structure collapse under its own weight. The next morning, the official notice arrived from the government. The email was brief and clear. Due to incomplete risk compliance certification, the $40 million logistics contract was on hold. The panic was immediate. Monica tried to pull the logs, but the system returned the same message: compliance anchor unknown. They were locked out of their own records because federal contracts require a traceable human authority. They had terminated that authority, and the system had locked the doors. My phone rang with a Washington area code. It was the assistant to the board chair, Walter Albright. He requested a private meeting with me that day. No security, no intermediaries. Just a quiet room downtown, I agreed. I arrived early and Walter was already there, his sleeves rolled up, reviewing a pad of paper. "You know what is happening?" he asked as I sat down. "I know what I initiated," I said. He nodded. "They told me this would resolve itself in 48 hours, but I read the contract. A lapse in compliance triggers a federal review that can kill the deal entirely." "Why did they fire you?" "They wanted to prove a point," I said. "And now they are in a tailspin." "How far are you willing to let this go?" I met his gaze. "I have not decided if I am finished yet." Walter leaned back, and I saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. The balance of power had shifted, and I had not even entered the building. The boardroom doors felt heavy as I walked inside the next morning. I was dressed in my best suit, not for a confrontation, but for a resolution. Gerald Briggs was pacing the room, his face red, shouting about unprofessional behavior. "This is a company, Clarence, not your personal playground," he yelled. Zachary sat next to him, silent for once, his phone face down. The rest of the board members watched in silence. Walter Albright stood at the end of the table, watching the scene develop. "Let us be honest," Gerald said, pointing a finger at me. "You came here to feel important. You were given 12 years of employment, and you decided to disrupt the system out of spite." I did not reply. I sat down and placed my phone on the table. Gerald continued his rant, claiming they were building new frameworks and that my actions were merely a tantrum. I tapped the screen of my phone once. The monitor behind Gerald flickered, switching from his presentation to the live system logs. The screen showed every internal system labeled in red as unverified. "What is this?" Gerald asked, spinning around. The screen displayed export licenses, financial filings, and payroll records, all flagged for missing identity verification. An alert flashed. "Chain of custody interrupted. Anchor Clarence Vance status disavowed." Priscilla Hellman leaned forward. "My goodness," she whispered. "This is not a simple glitch or a server error," she added, looking closely at the logs. "The system has automatically restricted access because there is no verified anchor to authenticate the transactions." Gerald turned to me, telling me I could not override the system during a board meeting. "It is not an override," Priscilla corrected him. "It is a documented protocol triggered by an anchor failure. The system is doing exactly what Clarence designed it to do." Walter Albright nodded, his expression grim. "Gerald, you told us this was a simple network migration. This is not a migration. This is a self-inflicted blackout." He turned his gaze to Zachary, who was sweating under his designer shirt. "And you, young man, were supposed to streamline operations. Instead, you have paralyzed our entire infrastructure because you did not understand how a basic security handshake works." Walter finally spoke to me, asking how long it would remain in this state. "Until I enter the verification key," I said. "Or until you rebuild the infrastructure from scratch, which will take at least 9 months. Gerald's voice cracked. "You are doing this for revenge." "No," I said. "I am doing this because your arrogance endangered the company. You fired me over a cup of coffee to make an example of me. Well, here is your example." Another alert flashed on the screen, showing the federal contract was now officially suspended. Gerald looked at Walter, claiming I was blackmailing them. "He is showing us the value we threw away," Walter said. Then he looked at me. "Clarence, what are your terms?" I took a breath. "First, Zachary Cole's contract is terminated immediately for cause, and his access is revoked today." Zachary flinched, looking at the table. "Second, the Human Resources Department, specifically Lydia Thorne, is placed under a third-party audit. I want a review of every termination over the last 5 years." Lydia sat frozen, unable to speak. Third, I return as Chief Ethics Officer, reporting directly to the board, bypassing human resources and the Chief Executive Officer. Gerald made a choking sound. And finally, Gerald is placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into retaliatory behavior and abuse of authority. His badge is deactivated the moment I restore the system. Gerald stood up, shouting that this was a takeover. "This is what happens when you fire the Foundation," Priscilla said. Walter looked at the board members, seeing no objections, and then turned to me. "If we agree, you will restore the system?" "I will stabilize it within the hour," I said. "Full restoration tomorrow. But the override key is not returned until the agreement is signed." The lawyer immediately began writing. Gerald sank into his chair, defeated. "You set a trap," he muttered. I looked him in the eye. "You set the trap," I replied. "I just let the system close the door." The boardroom was silent, and for the first time the truth was clear to everyone. I stood up slowly, picking up my phone. The terminal prompt was still waiting for my input. I pressed my thumb to the screen, authorizing the override. The boardroom monitor immediately updated, the red warnings turning to green. One by one, the logs verified. Compliance was restored, the chain was validated, and the federal portal went active. Outside the glass walls, the employees looked at their monitors as the systems came back to life. Notifications started appearing, and the servers began operating normally. You could feel the relief in the building. Then, the applause started. It began on the main floor and spread throughout the office. The employees were standing, clapping, and smiling. They did not know every detail, but they knew someone had stood up to the management and won. I did not celebrate. I picked up my tote bag and my coffee mug. I walked out of the room, past Gerald, who could not look at me, and past Zachary, who was staring at his blank screen. I walked past Lydia, whose hands were shaking, and out into the main hallway. No one tried to stop me. The mug was warm in my hand, the system was operational, and I was finally in control. The transition was completed over the next week, and the consequences of the board's decision were felt immediately. A third-party firm arrived to begin the audit of the Human Resources Department, uncovering years of systematic corporate malpractice. The investigators found that Lydia Thorne had repeatedly used minor policy violations to target senior employees who were close to their retirement. By terminating them under false pretenses, the company had saved millions of dollars in pension payouts over the years. The evidence was damning. Lydia was quietly let go before the month ended, her reputation in the corporate world completely ruined. She now faced a series of civil lawsuits from former employees who had been wrongfully deprived of their retirement savings. Zachary Cole was escorted from the building by the same security guard, Brandon, who had walked me out. Zachary tried to make a scene, yelling about his family connections, but Brandon simply pointed toward the exit doors, following the exact protocol I had established. Gerald Briggs remained on administrative leave for 3 weeks before the board announced his permanent retirement. The board chose to withhold his severance package, citing his failure to protect the company's assets and his clear breach of fiduciary duty. He was replaced by an interim leader who actually understood the regulatory landscape and respected the systems that kept the company operating. I took my new office on the top floor, a quiet space with a view of the city. My title as Chief Ethics Officer gave me the authority to veto any termination that did not meet our strict compliance standards. I made sure my first official act was to secure the pensions of every employee within 5 years of vesting, ensuring that no one else could be targeted for minor infractions. I also established a pension safety board to protect senior staff members from age discrimination. Fiona Mercer helped me draft the new guidelines, ensuring they were legally binding and could not be altered by future executives. The $40 million logistics contract with the Department of Transportation was finalized. The audit trails certified without a single error. The government officials expressed their appreciation for our quick resolution of the compliance issues, unaware of the boardroom battle that had taken place. The company was cleaner, more efficient, and finally focused on substance rather than appearance. The culture of fear was slowly replaced by one of collaboration, as employees realized they could speak up without fearing retaliation. I still grabbed my coffee from the executive wing every morning. Nobody questioned it, and nobody dared to tape signs to the glass door. The espresso machine was clean, the vanilla syrup was fully stocked, and the environment was quiet. I took a sip from my compliance mug, feeling the warmth of the coffee, and looked out over the city. It had taken a system failure to show them what held the company together, but the lesson had been learned. The structure was secure, the rules were clear, and the foundation was solid. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began my daily review of the compliance logs, completely at peace in the office I had built. The system was whole, and I was finally where I belonged. If you enjoyed this story of corporate justice, please subscribe to the channel to support our content and keep the coffee hot. Your support helps us bring more stories of quiet victory to light, and we appreciate every single listener who stands with us against corporate greed. Thank you for watching, and remember to always watch the fine print. To prevent any future oversight, the Safety Committee now holds monthly reviews where every policy change is scrutinized. We no longer allow single-point failures, but we also ensure that the people who build our safety systems are respected. In the end, corporate compliance is not about restricted coffee zones or executive privileges. It is about building a system that protects its workers as much as its profits. As I watched the sunset from my new office window, I knew that the foundation of our company was finally built on trust rather than fear. The employees walked through the hallways with a renewed sense of security, knowing that their contributions were valued and their rights were protected under a system that could no longer be weaponized against them. That was the real victory, and it was worth every single drop of coffee. The compliance department was no longer seen as a hindrance, but as the shield that kept the entire enterprise safe from its own worst impulses. I took another slow sip of my coffee, turned to my monitor, and got back to work. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the concrete plaza. I stood by my window, taking a deep breath of the clean air, feeling the first real sense of relief in 12 years. I was no longer carrying the weight of a company that did not value my labor. They had tried to discard me like a broken piece of office equipment, but the system I built had held up a mirror to their own incompetence. The real power was not in the glass and steel of this building, but in the protocols and the people who understood them. The next morning, when I returned to the office, the atmosphere was completely different. The employees walked through the hallways with a renewed sense of security, knowing that their rights were protected under the new guidelines. I took my seat at the new desk on the top floor, looking out over the city, ready to build a foundation that would last for years to come. The transition was complete, the systems were secure, and the future of the company was finally in safe hands.